Part 1. First Meeting. Chapter 1. The caravan was halfway to Joppa when it was attacked. Roaming groups of bandits were not uncommon in Canaan, but usually a large group of people traveling together was safe. These were not ordinary bandits, though. They were riding horses and wielding flashing bronze swords. The caravan was from a small farming village near Jericho and was composed of 40 donkeys loaded down with the goods they hoped to ship from Joppa into Egypt. The villagers were virtually helpless before the onslaught. Rahab was at the back of the caravan with her mother and 2 of her brothers. Her father and her other brothers were toward the front, walking with the donkeys that carried their casks of precious wine. The boys and men had only sticks, but they shouted at the women to get behind them and bravely prepared to defend their own. At first, Rahab had been too startled to be afraid. Then, as one of her brothers pushed her behind him and she looked up to see an enormous horse bearing down upon them both, she screamed. The horse came on in a cloud of dust, and Rahab felt her mother grab her cloak and pull her backward. Her brother raised his stick and held it braced right at the height of the oncoming horse's chest. The horse swerved at the thrust, and the horseman missed her brother with his thrusting sword. Rahab pulled herself from her mother's grasp so she could drag her brother away from the plunging horse. As she grasped his tunic, she spared one fierce glare of hatred for the man who had managed to right his seat on the horse and was coming on again. There was chaos in the caravan. People were shouting and screaming, and some of the loaded donkeys were being driven away by the bandits. The deadly swords cut down anyone who tried to go after the donkeys. Then, before Rahab knew what was happening, the horseman plucked her away from her brother and lifted her to lie on her stomach before him on the horse. Rahab fought. She kicked at the horse's legs, screamed, and squirmed to get away. The animal reared, and she almost managed to slide down to safety. But cruel hands gripped her, and the horse was swung around. Rahab heard her mother shouting her name. "Mama! Mama!" she screamed back. She kicked at the horse again, and the man holding her muttered something, then raised his fist and hit her hard on the chin. Everything went dark. When Rahab came to, she was lying flat on her back. Her head was pounding, her jaw felt as if it were on fire, and her mouth was dry as sand. She lay still and looked around. What had happened? Where was she? How had she gotten here? Why did she hurt so much? She lifted her eyes and saw a tent roof over her. From outside the tent walls came the sound of strange male voices. She tried to sit up, but her head hurt too much. She waited, breathing slowly, then tried again, ignoring the pain. As she sat there, it slowly came back to her. The attack, the bandits, the horse, the man, her capture. It must have really happened, because here she was in this unknown place. Had they taken anyone else? Her mother? Her father? Her brothers? Rahab was ashamed of the hope that shot through her at this thought. Of course she wished her family was safe, but she didn't think she had ever wanted anything in her life as much as she wanted her father right now. The flap to the tent opened and someone came in. Suddenly Rahab was terrified. Was it the man who had taken her? What did he want? She was only 12 years old. What good could she be to anyone? She stared at the cloaked figure coming toward her in the dimness of the tent, her heart hammering. When she saw the figure was actually a woman, she felt almost giddy with relief. "Ah, you're awake," the woman said. She spoke Canaanite, but in an accent foreign to Rahab. "I want my father," Rahab said, her voice trembling. "Your father is not here, girl, and you'll have to get used to doing without him. Now, how are you feeling? I'm afraid Sahir hit you a little too hard. You've been out for quite a while." "You'll have to get used to doing without him? What did that mean? Was her father dead? Where is my father? My mother? My brothers?" she demanded. "Why am I here alone? Have you dared to hurt them?" She would kill this woman if her family was dead. She would kill all of these people. She didn't care if she died too. She would do it. Rahab stared as hard as she could at the ugly, middle-aged woman who was speaking to her. "Where are they?" she repeated in a louder voice. The woman shrugged. "I imagine they're on their way back to wherever they came from. The goods they were transporting so carefully to Joppa now belong to us. And you, my girl, apparently are one of those prizes, thanks to that idiot Sahir." The woman bent over Rahab and put a hard hand on her forearm. "Get up and come outside. I want to look at you." Rahab stumbled behind the woman out into the late-day sunlight. Her headache ratcheted up as the brilliance of the day struck her eyes. "Look at me," the woman said sharply. Rahab was almost as tall as the woman, stared at her unblinkingly. "Ah," the woman breathed as she looked Rahab over from her head to her feet. Then she grasped Rahab's sore chin in her fingers and turned her face slowly from one side to the other. "Perhaps Sahir was right after all. Even he has to be right sometimes, I suppose. You could be worth a fortune to us." Rahab did not understand what the woman was talking about, but the calculating look in her eyes reminded Rahab of the way she had seen merchants look at wares they were thinking of buying. Her anger died, replaced by an intense, overpowering fear. The woman took Rahab back into the tent and remained with her for the remainder of the night. 2 men were posted outside the tent flap, defeating any hopes Rahab had of escape. Finally, she slept. When she woke in the morning, she could hear the noise from the camp outside. Men were talking, and when a donkey brayed, someone shouted a curse at it. She sat up, pushed her disheveled hair off her face, and looked around for the woman, whose name she had learned was Aya. The flap to the tent opened, and the woman came in carrying a water jar. "Drink," she said, pouring some of the water into a cup and handing it to Rahab. Rahab finished the cup and asked for more. After Rahab had finished the second cup, Aya said, "We will be leaving shortly. I'll bring you some bread and dates to break your fast." "Wait!" Rahab cried as the woman started to leave. "You must tell me why you have taken me. You have our donkeys and wine. You don't need me. Please, Aya, let me go." "Idiot!" the woman said. "You are never going home to your pitiful little farm. You are going to Egypt, my girl. The great lords there have palaces a poor little peasant like you could never even dream of. You will dine off golden plates, eat perfectly prepared delicacies, and drink only the best of wines. You will be dressed in the finest of white linen and wear magnificent jewels to adorn your beauty. You will be cosseted as much as any grand Egyptian lady. One day you will thank us for what we have done for you. You'll see." Rahab stared at the furrowed, sunburned face of Aya in amazement. What could she be talking about? Why should she be treated like some grand lady? "Do you think I am an Egyptian?" she asked, wondering if Aya might be a little muddled in the head. The woman cast her eyes upward in disbelief at such stupidity. "No, you're not an Egyptian girl. That face never came out of Egypt. But it will be part of the spice, you see, that you are different." "No, I don't see." Unlike most girls in her culture, Rahab was accustomed to speaking her mind. As the only girl and the youngest in the family, she had been indulged far beyond the limits of most girl children. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. She knew her voice was surprisingly husky for one her age. Aya's slanted brown eyes narrowed. She said slowly and clearly, "We are going to sell you, my dear. One of those debauched Egyptian lords will pay a fortune for a chance to get his hands on you. Sahir knew it the minute he saw your face." Her lips curled in a smile. "You're a defiant little thing, too. I hear some of the lords relish a challenge." Rahab did not fully understand what the woman was talking about, but she understood enough to know that if these bandits had their way, her future would be horrible. They had something evil in mind for her, and her skin prickled with fear. She couldn't help the tears that came into her eyes. "Let me go home," she begged. "Please, please, let me go home." The tent fold opened again, and this time a man came in. He was dressed in the usual costume of Canaan, a tunic that stopped halfway between his knees and his ankles, with leather sandals on his feet. His hair was mixed with gray, but his beard was still mostly brown. He addressed himself to Aya.
I want to see this so-called prize myself before I go to the expense of shipping her off to Egypt.
Aya gestured toward the trembling Rahab.
There she is. Bring her outside so I can see better.
Rahab tried to hold her ground, but Aya pushed her so hard she fell to her knees.
Get up, the woman said with contempt. You'll only make trouble for yourself by resisting.
In the part of Rahab's brain that had not been paralyzed by fear, she realized the truth of this statement and walked out of the tent without further protest. The early morning sky was cloudless. It was autumn, and there was always the possibility of clouds and perhaps even rain, coming in later. But the bright light showed Rahab the line of men on horseback and the huge collection of loaded donkeys that would make up their train. Rahab summoned all her courage and said to the man contemptuously, You are filthy thieves who prey on good, hard-working people, and I despise you. The man laughed.
I see we have a spitfire here.
He grabbed Rahab's chin as Aya had done and held her face up to him. Her instinct was to pull away, but the pain in her jaw reminded her of what these people could do. She stared over his shoulder, pretending he was not there.
Amazing,
the man said. He dropped his hand and Rahab backed away. His eyes raked up and down her body.
How old are you?
12.
You look younger, which is good. Not a child, but not yet a woman.
He reached out and ran a rough hand down the front of Rahab's tunic. She gasped and pulled away.
Sweet little buds.
He looked at Aya.
She is perfect. We will get good money from the slavers for her.
Rahab finally understood. No! She screamed. No! 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 I won't be a slave! You can't make me!
Oh, I rather think we can, the evil man said. Tie her up, Aya, but be careful. I don't want her marked. It will affect her value.
Aye, Ugar, I understand. Rahab fought, but she was helpless against the strength of the two men who came to help Aya bind her hands and feet and load her into a litter.